tell, then you see the road. I'm out to my soul into the size whenever the smoke clear out of my face and my picture perfect.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the first part of, What If Harry Potter Meets Monster Girl Encyclopedia. Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of Asian Lion Heart 310 on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. The sun was high in the sky and its rays made the surface of the ocean shine. In addition to the good weather and the peaceful sound of the water, from time to time one could see dolphins jumping out of the water, playing and whistling in unison. In the sky, we could even see a few sea birds flying around. But while the scenery was peaceful and enjoyable, it is not what is interesting us at the moment. No, it was the massive white cruise ship sailing on the sea. It was not the biggest ship around, but it was still an impressive sight. On board, many people, around 3,000 or more, were minding their own business, such as playing, chatting, sunbathing, or simply looking at the ocean, taking pictures. From time to time, we could see the cruise workers doing their own things. However, our attention was focused on a little group of people, a family to be precise. There was a man and a woman, as well as 2 children, a big one and a smaller one. All 4 of them were English people. The man could be described as the unholy offspring of a walrus and a whale. He was a big, beefy man with a large face who had thick, dark hair, a bushy black mustache, with hardly any neck, mainly because of how fat he was, and mean little eyes. His wife was his total opposite. She was a blonde-haired woman with an unnatural long neck and large pale eyes. While the man looked like an overgrown walrus, she looked like a horse, a really ugly one, and the type of horse you do not want to ride. The children were polar opposite of one another. The first boy, if you can call him that, was the carbon copy of the walrus-like man, except that he had thick blonde hairs and watery blue eyes. Because of how fat he was, he looked like a pig, a really large pig. He looked to be fatter than his father, especially if you ratio between height and girth of the 2 of them. Then there was the last child, who looked to be no older than 5 or 6 at most. He had messy raven hair and appealing bright emerald green eyes. He was shorter than a child his age should be, and his clothes seemed way too big for him. Underneath the hair covering his forehead, was a strange scar which strangely looked like a lightning bolt in shape. Underneath the scar, we could see large and ugly glasses. But who are those people? The walrus-like man was Vernon Dursley, and he was everything you could despise in someone: arrogant, surly, combustible, blustering, abrasive, petty-minded, and strongly intolerant toward people who were different than him. At the port, he almost had troubles with someone because the latter was of African origin. With people, for example beggars, he would feel no sympathy. He would judge people based on their wealth or their status. The horse, I mean his wife Petunia Dursley née Evans, was no better. She was nosy, spiteful, jealous, hostile, and repressed woman who hated anything that wasn't normal, at least her definition of normal. Like her fat husband, she had no sympathy for people who she deemed unworthy. The pig-like child was Petunia and Vernon's son. In their opinion, their little Duddykins was a perfect angel, but the truth was much more different. Dudley was nothing more than a spoiled brat with obesity thanks to his parents' care. Due to this, he was demanding, extremely ungrateful, selfish and manipulative. He would constantly whine and fake cry to get what he wants. The perfect definition of a spoiled brat, in short. But sadly it didn't stop there. Dudley was also a bully, his main pleasure to picking on smaller and weaker people than himself. His main target was the last child of the lovely family. The child's name was Harry James Potter, and he was Petunia's nephew and the son of her dead sister. However, there was no love between them, as Petunia hated him with passion. Why? He doesn't know, but it had something to do with his mother. From what his loving uncle and aunt told him, his parents died in a car crash many years ago when he was still a baby. Then, after the accident, he had been dumped on their doorsteps during a cold night in November. The Dursleys only took him in for the goodness of their hearts, but not once did they stop reminding him that his parents were pathetic drunks and that he won't amount to anything good in his life because of it. Even worse, ever since they took him in, Petunia and Vernon used him as their own personal SLV. During the few years following his parents' accident, Harry was forced to do many household chores. The young boy was responsible for cooking, cleaning and many others chores. He often did them under the threat of punishment if he didn't comply. The least terrible punishments were to lock him in his cupboard. Yes, they made him sleep in a cupboard instead of a normal bedroom and denying him food for a determinate lapse of time. But what he would usually get was to be used as a punching ball by either his uncle or his cousin. Vernon would sometimes punish him with terrible beatings before locking him in his cupboard. The reasons were varied: breaking a vase by accident, getting better grades than Dudley, or just for pleasure. Dudley also enjoyed using him as a punching ball, but the lard ball knew he could get away with it. His friends would sometimes join in the fun even at school. In short, Harry's life was far from enviable. All four of them came from England, and precisely, from Surrey in London. Then why were they here? Simple: Vernon, thanks to his job as a manager of a drill-making company, won a promotion and 3 tickets for a cruise on the Atlantic. The whole family was ecstatic, but then turned somber after it was revealed that they had to bring the freak with them as his babysitter was too sick to take care of him. Vernon's mood became worse after he had to buy a ticket for his beloved nephew, and Dudley hadn't stopped complaining about no wanting the freak with them. Petunia had to calm him down by giving the lard ball some sweets. What about Harry? The small child was quite excited, as this was the first time he had seen such a great amount of water all at once, and his emerald green eyes shined with delight when he saw the dolphin swimming not too far from the boat. For him, the sight of the ocean and the sea animals was the most appealing he saw in his short life. Another good thing was that, so far, his relatives left him alone, as they didn't want it to attract attention to themselves. Petunia had to explain to her brat of a son that he had to be on his best behavior, otherwise they would all be kicked out of the boat. At first the brat listened, and the trip went smoothly for Harry, at least if you doesn't count the glares and sneers of disdain aimed at him regularly by his family, but then it all changed after a few days on the boat. "You worthless freak!" Vernon snarled loudly as he punched his nephew repeatedly, his face showing nothing but rage and hatred at the small child before him. He and Vernon were in a secluded part of the ship where no one could be seen beside the two. A few moments ago, an accident happened during lunchtime at the restaurant. Dudley Dursley, bored out of his mind, decided that it was a great idea to push his cousin toward one of the waiters. The impact caused the man to accidentally spill the plates he was holding right on a customer, an old man, sitting close by. At first the customer was angry at the waiter, but then turned his attention to the child that had crashed against the waiter. It was thanks to another customer that Harry avoided a strong reprimand, and he had watched with satisfaction as Dudley Dursley was lectured by not only the customer but the waiter as well. Vernon Dursley, of course, had tried to defend his son, but it was useless, and he and his family were forced to leave the restaurant, ashamed and red of anger. While Petunia took her precious baby elsewhere on the boat, Vernon, roughly grabbed his nephew before dragging him somewhere else, away from eyes. Which lead us to this moment. "How dare you put my son in trouble? Who do you think you are, you worthless abomination?" Vernon roared out in pure anger as he punched the poor child repeatedly. Usually, the fat man would have yelled a lot louder, but because he didn't want to get caught he had to tune it down. Harry whimpered as he was punched again and again by his uncle, using his hands to protect his face. "We took you in for the goodness of our heart, and that's how you repay us for our generosity," the fat man snarled again as he kicked the boy with his foot, sending him tumbling on the ground before crashing against the barrier that prevented people from falling off the boat. Sadly, Harry didn't have the time to recover as he felt himself being picked up by his uncle before cringing as his face was inches away from the man's, who didn't waste time as he spat at him those words. "I have enough of you, freak. It's time for me to do something I should have done a long time ago." With these words, and after a quick look around to make sure no one was watching, his face showed no hesitation as he did something that could horrify anyone: he threw the child overboard. Harry had barely the time to cry out in surprise before he met the cold embrace of the water below. Oh! It seems the freak fell off by accident. Vernon began to say in mock shock before a sneer grew on his face as he added. Well, not my problem anymore. Maybe the sharks will enjoy him. The large man took a few steps away from there before pausing for a second. What am I saying? Even those wretched beasts wouldn't dare eating this disgusting brat, he muttered with a dark chuckle before resuming his walk with a proud look on his face. Clearly, he had no remorse for what he had done. Meanwhile, Harry James Potter was panicking as he struggled to stay upon the surface. Thanks to the Dursleys, the poor boy never got the chance to learn how to swim, and thanks to his scrawny figure, he was slowly but surely starting to tire himself. Soon his struggles weakened to the point that he didn't have the strength to move, and Harry found himself sinking in the water. As he saw the surface slowly going farther away from him, his consciousness also started to slowly decline. I'm going to die, he thought to himself as a thin smile soon appeared on his face. That's fine for me, no one would miss me anyway, he thought in a sad tone as he closed his eyes, accepting his fate. Soon enough, his life of pain and misery will be over, all thanks to people who were supposed to take care of him as one of their own. I wish I knew how it felt to be loved, were his final thoughts before he totally lose consciousness. As the poor child's unconscious form slowly sunk deeper underwater, he was unaware that he was being watched. A few seconds after losing consciousness, a figure appeared at his side, a figure whose arms prevented him from sinking further. It was, in appearance, a appealing young woman with long hair who was wearing what looked like a priestess outfit. However, her entire being looked transparent except for her eyes, which shined in a bright white light. This woman was none other than Lady Magic herself. Being what she was, she could keep an eye on every magical beings in the world and had been horrified by the treatments this little one endured for so long. She had wanted to curse the ones responsible, but instead decided to take care of the poor child instead. How? By healing him whenever he was injured, which was every single night since he was left with those people. Lady Magic cared for every magical beings in the world, but then everything changed many years ago. Now only magical creatures were worth her attention, and the magical people were left on their own. Those people were called wizards and witches. They looked like normal humans but could perform magic with the use of a wand. Lady Magic had seen great potential in them in the past, but not anymore. A few years ago, some wizards and witches started to use their gifts for selfish reasons. She then gave her gifts to some people to try to rectify this, but it was futile. Apparently, because they were not ancient magical families, they weren't worthy of being called wizards and witches. Thanks to the prejudice, only a few of those newly gifted decided to reside among the magical people and instead choose to live as normal people. Those who wanted to stay were seen as second-class citizens. Worse, some wizards and witches even went as far as seeing magic as a way to ensure supremacy over what they considered as lesser beings. Because of that, Lady Magic grew to dislike wizards and witches. However, there were a few who still respected her, and among them were the parents of the child she had been helping for some time now. A child she grew to like as he proven himself to be the humblest, sweetest and most respectable magical human she had come across over the last centuries. And for that reason, she refused to let him die. After all, good boys should always be rewarded, don't you think? Smiling at the child, she slowly used one of her hands to caress his face while using her magic to make him breathe underwater. As she caressed him, Lady Magic was wondering what to do now. She couldn't send him back to those people as they would harm him again or even kill him themselves. Sending him to the wizarding world of Britain would be no better, as an old man she grew to dislike had many plans for the boy and none of them were good. Beside, their Ministry of Magic would try to corrupt the boy to their image. After a moment of thoughts, an idea popped into her mind, and Lady Magic looked at the unconscious form in her arms with a warm smile. "Don't worry, child, where I'm sending you. You will know nothing but love and happiness," she told him telepathically, despite knowing that he couldn't hear her, in a gentle tone before kissing his forehead not too far from where the scar was. The kiss left a little mark behind, but she ignored it in favor of looking at the strange lightning bolt scar on the child's forehead. She stared at it with disgust for a moment before smirking. "Look like I will kill two birds with one stone, as they say. Enjoy your last moments in existence, beta delta lambda upsilon gamma mu alpha, because soon, you will be no more," Lady Magic muttered sternly to the lightning bolt scar before a strange light started to surround the boy's scrawny form. The transparent woman watched in satisfaction as the little one soon disappeared in a bright light. "May you enjoy your new life, Harry James Potter, away from the prejudice and stupidity of the wizarding world," Lady Magic said tenderly before a smirk grew on her face as she thought of how the magical people of England would react at the disappearance of their beloved savior. Now that her work here was done, Lady Magic disappeared in thin air with a snap of her fingers, leaving some confused fish behind in the process. At the same time, far away from there, in England, something was happening. To be more precise, at the second lowest level of the place of the Ministry of Magic. In a place called the Hall of Prophecies by the Wizards, one of the orbs started to glow in a bright light before cracks appeared on the glass. A few moments later, the orb exploded, sending shards of glass everywhere. The mist inside it dissipated a few seconds later with a loud cry. The sound caught the attention of some people who rushed in the hall to see what was going on, unaware that a spiritual being was laughing her head off at the entire thing. Elsewhere, in the Scottish Highlands, at Hogwarts, something was equally happening. In the headmaster's office, the name, Harry Potter, disappeared from the register, and thankfully, the fools of the wizarding world won't discover it before a long time. Lady Magic couldn't wait to see their faces. Somewhere on Earth. "What have you done?" a feminine voice could be heard hissing in anger at someone. "I made sure a poor soul could have a better life." Lady Magic's voice answered the first voice with sternness. "It was not supposed to happen." "Then what was supposed to happen?" Lady Magic asked the still unknown woman in a dangerous tone. "This child was supposed to sacrifice himself for the wizarding world." Those words caused Lady Magic to become angrier. The wizards and witches don't deserve to be saved, Fate. They deserved nothing more than to disappear from the face of this world. The woman, who was now known as Fate, backed away from her enraged fellow woman, clearly taken aback by her response. "I always knew you were a bee, but to allow a child to suffer like this. That's low even for you." Lady Magic snarled at the other woman with fury. "Bee, but it was necessary. Beside, he was supposed to have a good life after the whole Tom Riddle thing." Fate tried to say to defend herself, but instead made things even worse. "A good life? You call being forced into an illegal marriage contract by a bunch of greedy people a good life? You call being brainwashed and thinking he must sacrifice himself for the whole wizard kind a good life? You call being turned into a little weapon for this senile old man a good life?" Fate backed away from the clearly enraged Lady Magic, but then bristled at the last words as her expression turned angry. She opened her mouth to say something, but then quickly stopped herself when she saw her fellow woman shooting her the most vicious glare she had ever seen. "For too long I have watched you destroy people's life with those DMN prophecies of yours, Fate. It's over. If this boy had been raised by his own kind, then I would have looked away, but you left him to suffer at the hands of magicless people, no less." Lady Magic's glare deepened even more, and Fate gulped in slight fear at the sight. "The second this boy was handed to those monsters, he entered my jurisdiction. Magical beings and non-magical beings shouldn't meet one another, because it would bring chaos like no other before. And you know I'm right." Fate flinched at the reminder of what happened the last time humanity learned about magical people and wisely chose to stay silent. "Now answer me, was this child supposed to be tossed off a ship by his family? Was he supposed to drown in the middle of the ocean?" Lady Magic asked her with a glare that could melt ice while crossing her arms over her bust. Fate opened her mouth to answer before stopping as she thought about it. Her shoulders quickly slumped in defeat as she released a deep sigh. "No. Then don't lecture me when it was not me who started all of it. Beside, even if I took him back to his family, they would have killed him. In any case, this poor little one was doomed to die." Lady Magic hissed to her sternly. Fate stayed silent for a moment as she pondered Lady Magic's words. Her face was hidden by shadows, so it was difficult to see her expression. Her fellow entity sighed deeply, but her eyes were still locked on her comrade, waiting for an answer. "Where is the boy now?" Fate finally asked in a soft tone after a moment of silence. Safe and in a world where he would know nothing but love and affection and maybe a bit of pleasure, Lady Magic answered to her comrade with a straight face while whispering the last part to herself. Fate nodded her head in acceptance, but then her eyes narrowed as she opened her mouth to ask, "What about the Horcrux?" "It will be dealt with by the people of this world," Lady Magic replied with a shrug of indifference. "What about his training?" Fate asked her pointedly. "He will not go to Hogwarts. The second the Horcrux will be destroyed, all the knowledge Tom gathered in his life will be absorbed by the little one," Lady Magic responded with a stern expression. "I see very well. I apologize for acting like a.b." Lady Magic offered with a hidden smirk. Fate shot her a glare but sighed deeply before answering, "Yes, but now I have to change many things." "Don't." "What?" Fate asked her, dumbly. "Don't do anything. Let the things as they are right now. Let the wizards and witches deal with the consequences of their stupidities," Lady Magic explained to her fellow immortal with a smirk that could scare anyone. "You really hate magical people, huh?" Fate asked her with a raised brow and a tiny smile of amusement. "After all the things they did, could you blame me?" Lady Magic asked her flatly. "No. Beside, you should thank me because both you and I will get to see a comical show," Lady Magic retorted with a big grin that was soon shared by the decider of fate. Too true. The giggles that escaped their mouth could put the Joker to shame. In another universe, a man with chalk-white skin, ruby-red lips permanently fixed in a demonic grin, and bright green hair sneezed loudly, as if he caught a illness. Meanwhile, in a still unknown world. Peace. Quiet. Were the words that could feel a certain little boy with messy black hair and emerald green eyes as consciousness slowly returned to him. It was a new feeling for him as he couldn't remember the last time he had been like this. Harry then frowned in his sleep as he felt a gentle breeze touch his skin accompanied by the melodious chirping of birds. That was even stranger as the last thing he remembered before losing consciousness was him drowning after his uncle tossed him off the ship, and last time he checked there were no birds nor wind underwater. Opening his eyes, he had to blink them several times to be sure he wasn't dreaming when he saw his surroundings. No more was he underwater. In fact, he was laying on green grasses as around him stood large trees and many thick bushes. He was in a forest. Wait a minute, how could he actually see it? Scrunching his eyes, he saw with shock that he wasn't wearing his glasses. However, it didn't mind it as he always hated his glasses, but the pleasure of not having to wear them disappeared as another feeling spread through his small bruised body. Fear. How did I get here? Where am I? He asked loudly to himself as he looked at his surrounding in total shock and panic. But then he froze as his eyes widened in horror. My freakishness happened again. Whimpering, the poor child went into a fetal position as he wrapped his arms around his knees, crying a bit. He hated his freakishness because of it, his relatives hated him. Once again, with this, he proved that he was indeed a pathetic freak. But then he quickly stopped moving when he heard a sound coming from himself. Blushing in embarrassment, Harry then decided that it might be time for him to look for some food and maybe something to drink as he still had the taste of salt water in his mouth. But where to start? It was the first time he was confronted to such a strange situation. He didn't know a thing about surviving in a forest. He was about to give up when his stomach roaring again in hunger. With a soft pout, he patted his belly as he slowly went back on his feet, wincing at the pain he felt from the beating he received from his uncle. After a minute of trying to maintain his balance, the small boy then slowly went deeper into the forest, hoping to not encounter anything dangerous on his quest for food and water. Time skip. Yummy! Harry cried out in pleasure when he found a thick bush filled with berries. It took him who know how long to find it as he was scared of what could be lurking in those woods, wolves, bears. After all, he was nothing but easy prey for them as he had nothing to defend himself with if he got attacked. That and the fact he was nothing but a skinny scrawny child. But it wasn't the only thing that occupied his mind. It was a single question he had been wondering ever since he first started this quest: where was he? He knew he couldn't be in England as the weather was warmer than what he was used to, but thanks to the little amount of time he had outside of private drive, all thanks to a trio of annoyance we all know and love dearly, he didn't have a single clue of where in the world he could be. But his thoughts were broken when his stomach growled for the 10th time, maybe to order him to focus on his previous mission, finding food. And he did. After hours of searching and cautiousness, the thin child's eyes had widened in pleasure at the sight of blackberries. Certainly, it was not a king's meal for normal people, but these berries will satisfy his hunger. Beside, it was better than the things the Dursleys used to give him, aka stuff from the garbage or small leftovers. Smiling, the dark-haired child started to wolf down the berries, humming in content. However, what he didn't know was that something was watching him hidden in the shadows of the bushes. A pair of glowing orange cat-like eyes were staring at him. If you looked closely, you could see the confusion and concern shining in them. The subject of its concern was a few feet away from it, completely unaware that he was being watched. After a moment, the thin child burped slightly while holding his stomach in contempt. "Look like I'm full," he whispered softly to himself before looking around, adding, "Now where to find some water?" Hearing this, the hidden creature decided that it might time to reveal itself. However, to not scare the tiny little thing, it decided to first make him aware of its presence. "What are you doing out here, little one?" it said in a feminine voice from the bushes in a kind and gentle tone. Harry, who was rubbing his belly, instantly flinched when he heard the unexpected female voice and started to look around in panic, as fear could be seen shining in his eyes. Seeing this, the unknown being felt a pang of guilt but then brushed it aside to talk in a smooth tone. "Don't be afraid, little one, I'm not going to hurt you." Harry turned his head toward where the voice came from and blinked a bit at the sight of two orange cat eyes. "Kitty?" he asked softly while titling his head to the side. A chuckle was heard from where the eyes were. "Oh. You are a cat lover, huh?" the voice asked him with a hint of amusement. "Why, yes, cats are nice and fluffy," Harry answered with some contained excitement and shyness. A giggle was heard at those words. "I'm glad to hear that, little one, because I would feel bad to scare you with my appearance." The emerald-eyed little boy blinked at this and a cute expression of confusion appeared on his face. "Your appearance?" he asked her gently while titling his head to the side again. "Allow me to show you, little one," the voice said in a gentle tone before a figure stepped out of the bushes. Needless to say that Harry was taken aback by the newcomer's appearance. In front of him was a tall orange-haired young woman with a slim, but muscular physique. She had slightly tanned skin and unusual cat-like features. A good part of her legs and her upper arms were covered in brownish-orange and black striped fur, ending in massive tiger-like paws. Wagging behind her, was a large and long strppd tail, and on top of her head, we could see small, fluffy ears poking out. She was also wearing what looks like an armor of green and yellow which only protected her melons and nether regions. Her shoulder pads looked like golden tiger heads. Around her neck, there was a strange collar made of white fur-like material along with a little bell. Unknown to him, the cat-like creature was walking in the forest when she heard some rustling along with a cry of pleasure. Curious, she decided to investigate it and was totally unprepared to see a human child alone in the woods and eating blackberries. Her shock was reinforced at the fact he was a male human child. They were not common as the majority of the children in this world were girls, so to see a little boy was pretty shocking. But now that she was much closer to him, she would be lying to herself if she said he wasn't one of the cutest things she had ever seen. And his eyes were absolutely gorgeous to look at as they shined like emeralds under the sunlight. The tiger woman stopped a few steps from the little child, and so as not to frighten him, she knelt down. Much to her surprise and delight, the little one before showed no sign of fear and instead showed another feeling, childish amazement. His gorgeous emerald green eyes seemed to sparkle even more as he looked at her from head to toes, well, more like from head to paws. "Pretty," he muttered to himself before blushing a bit when he realized he said it out loud. The tiger-like woman giggled in amusement at his shyness while being touched by the compliment. "Thank you dear," she said with a purr of ravishment as she extended an arm toward him. Harry instantly flinched at the sight of her paw coming closer to him, expecting to be hit but instead felt her caressing his messy black hair. Blinking, the little boy slowly looked up at the woman who gave him a tender smile as she petted the top of his head. For a second, Harry wondered what to do as it was the first time someone touched him like this. The gesture was nice, a lot nicer than what he was used to. Unconsciously, he pressed his head into her large paw, rubbing his cheek against her palm like a cat would when petted. "Aw, aren't you a cutie?" the tigerish woman cooed as she smiled warmly. Harry blushed at those words and instantly pulled his face away from her paw. Soon, his index fingers touched one another, clearly showing his embarrassment and his shyness. "I like your costume, miss," he whispered softly, but she could hear for obvious reason. "This is no costume, little one," the woman answered with a tiny smile and a raised brow. "Doesn't this child know about monsters?" Blinking, Harry looked up at her, showing nothing but equal confusion. "But people don't have claws, or tails or fur." "That's because, little one, I'm a Momono, a monster." "A monster? But you don't look scary," he retorted back with a deepening frown and clear confusion. The feline-like monster smiled tenderly at him before opening her mouth to speak again. "Thank you dear, but it is true, I'm a monster, a Jinko to be precise." Harry listened in silence, his little mind pondering about what he just heard. Then his emerald green eyes fell on the fluffy ears on top of her head and couldn't help but wanting to pet them. Seeing this, the feline-like creature slowly picked him up, eliciting a surprised squeak from the tiny boy before pulling him gently against her chest. At the gesture, Harry couldn't retain himself from tensing in slight fear but then blinked in surprise when he saw her head lowering down, presenting her ears to him. "You can touch them if you want, but please don't pull on them," she told him gently while giving him a soft smile. I can really pet them?" he asked her with slight surprise and contained excitement. "Of course dear, but as I said, don't pull on them," the Jinko cooed to the little boy in her arms as she titled her head down further. After a second or two, she felt Harry's tiny hand touching her ears. At first, the touch was hesitant, but slowly, it turned more gleeful for lack of better term. With a smile, the Jinko closed her eyes at the feeling of his tiny hands caressing her ears. It felt really nice. To the point that she couldn't retain herself from purring. The sound of her purrs made him happy as a smile appeared on his thin face. He kept petting for a few moments until the Jinko reluctantly pulled her ears away, earning herself a little whine from the boy in her arms. She gave him a little smirk before her face showed nothing but seriousness. "Now little one, what is your name?" the Jinko asked him gently. Harry, miss," the black-haired boy answered with shyness. "Hello Harry, my name's Jaya dear. Now can you tell me, what are you doing out here? The forest is no place for someone as young as you." Jaya the Jinko told him with clear concern in her tone. Harry looked hesitant to answer, wondering if he should or not. Seeing the hesitation shining in his eyes, Jaya gave him a tender kiss on the forehead before whispering gently, "Don't be afraid little, as I said before, I won't hurt you." After seeing the gentle look in her orange eyes, Harry took a deep breath before talking. She told her everything. Of the fact his parents died when he was 1 and that he lived with his uncle and aunt. That he was forced to perform every single chores in the house. The treatment he endured at the hands of his relatives and every single person he met so far. As he spoke about his life, Jaya's face showed a great deal of emotions, sadness, pain, horror, shock, but the most prominent was anger. How dare they? How could they perform such heinous acts against something as defenseless as a child? Especially against someone like the little one she was holding in her arms. Despite not having met him for long, Jaya could clearly said with confidence that Harry was an adorable and well-mannered child. He clearly didn't deserve what they did to him. She almost lost her cool when he said that his own uncle tossed him off a ship. Thankfully she didn't and instead focused on comforting the poor child in her arms as once he finished his story, he buried his face against her melons, crying. "You poor thing," she whispered to him with pain and sympathy as she nuzzled the top of his face while rubbing his back with her paws. I did everything they wanted but they still hated me. What is wrong with me? Harry asked softly to himself, but his voice was heard by the one holding him. There's nothing wrong with you, dear. Some people just loves being cruel with others, Jaya retorted gently to him before kissing his forehead. Her orange eyes glanced at the strange scar on his forehead but didn't ask about it, as the most important thing right now was to comfort the clearly abused little one in her arms. After an hour and a half, Harry's crying had toned down a bit. Chasing the tears away with his tiny hands, the small child sniffled a little as Jaya used her right paw to caress his head. Then Harry looked up at her, dead in the eyes. Do you feel better now, dear? The Jinko asked him gently, and he nodded at her, not saying anything. Good, Jaya said with a nod as she went back on her feet before casually walking away from her previous spot with Harry in her arms. Miss Jaya. Where are we going? The little one asked her with curiosity. You'll see, dear, the Jinko answered with a soft smile. Despite his curiosity, Harry nodded his head in acceptance before pressing his tiny body against her chest. His head was at the crook of her neck and he was clearly savoring the warmth she exuded as well as the tight yet gentle way she held him and stroked his head. The warmth caused him to release a little yawn as he felt his eyes slowly drooping. Noticing this, Jaya started to hum a little tune to help him fall asleep, and it was a success as barely a few seconds later, he fell into Morpheus's arms. Sleep well, little one, the Jinko cooed gently into his ear before resuming her walk, heading somewhere with her precious cargo peacefully sleeping in her arms. As she walked, she couldn't help but thinking darkly, I hope you never met me, because help me, I will skin you slowly and painfully. On Earth, the Dursleys just arrived at the port when they all shivered in slight fear. However, they quickly brushed it aside to go pick up their suitcases, but they did wonder where that shiver came from. None of them knew what the future had for them. Harry was sleeping peacefully, enjoying the warmth coming from whatever he was laying against. In his sleep, the dark-haired child was suckling on his thumb like he usually do when he was asleep. However, he frowned as he wondered why his cupboard was so warm, but then internally panicked when he felt something caressing his face. Harry! Wake up, honey, a feminine voice whispered in his ear in a kind and sweet tone. Blinking in confusion, it took him a moment before he finally remembered everything that happened before he fell asleep. Dudley pushed him into a waiter, the angry customer, his cousin being chewed by say customer and the waiter, his Uncle Vernon tossing him off the ship to die in the middle of the sea, him waking up in a forest, him eating berries, and then him meeting. Opening his gorgeous emerald green eyes, Harry found himself looking at none other than Jaya, whose face showed nothing but kindness as she gazed down at him with her orange eyes. Hello, sleepyhead, the Jinko greeted him with a tiny grin on her face. You are real? He asked her with some relief. Of course I am, darling. Why wouldn't I be? Jaya asked him with a tiny frown of confusion and worry. I thought it was all a dream and that I would wake up in my cupboard. Harry's sad answer caused her to growl softly as she remembered what he told her about his disgusting relatives and how they treated him. Taking deep breaths, the Jinko took a few seconds to calm herself before looking down at her charge with kindness and affection. Well, I'm certainly not a dream, and neither is this. At the last part, she used one of her large paw to gently ruffle the top of his head, and her heart melted a bit at the giggle he released from the gesture. Smiling at the Jinko, the little boy then looked around and noticed several things. First of all, the sky was turning darker, meaning that night will arrive soon. The second thing he noticed was that the two of them were standing while the Jinko was standing, and he was in her arms not too far from a strange stone wall-like structure. The third thing he noticed were the clouds of smoke coming from whatever laid at the other side of those walls. Where are we, Miss Jaya? He asked her curiously as he looked at the Jinko. His voice was soft as if he didn't want to speak louder. We are about to enter a village, little one, Jaya answered calmly as she nuzzled the top of his head. Is this where you live? Harry asked her with a titled head, his big eyes looking at her. The Jinko smiled tenderly at her charge before answering, I live in the mountain. She pointed at the one at the east of their current position, but I do stop here from time to time. Oh, Harry said with understanding. Jaya smiled at him before inquiring him gently, are you ready now, little one? The dark-haired child nodded his head shyly, and with a smile, the Jinko slowly approached the gates. As they passed through the large doors, Harry's eyes widened by what he saw. There were a lot of people there and, while he could see some humans like him, many had extra features such as wings, fur or even scales. His surprised look and the shock that shone in his green eyes made Jaya escape a small laugh, visibly amused by his reaction. That and she found his current face simply adorable. As they walked through the streets, Harry couldn't help but noticing that, from time to time, he would catch someone watching him, whispering. However, none of them seemed to sneer or glare at him. Instead, many of the girls present were gushing at him. "Is that a human child? Oh, look at this cute little thing. Do you see his eyes? They are like emeralds. I wonder where this cute little thing came from." Harry couldn't help but blushing at those words, and Jaya, while amused by his reaction, glared at everyone present as if daring them to come closer, and they didn't. Sure, gushes and coos could be heard around them, but not once did anyone try to approach them. The Jinko and her charge went straight toward a really big building which strangely looked both like an inn and a hotel named the Smiling Lamia. As the two arrived at the entrance of the building, someone came out to greet them, well, more like slithered out to greet them, as the one welcoming them was not human. The newcomer had upper half of an appealing fair-skinned woman with pointy ears, reptilian dark yellow eyes and gorgeous brown hair that fell down her back. Much to Harry's embarrassment, she had no clothes on her except a pair of BR to hide her really big melonsy cup and a piece of tissue to hide her nether regions. Her lower half, much to Harry's shock, was of a long snake with brown scales, darker spots, and light underbelly. Jaya, the newcomer, greeted the Jinko with a bright smile while opening her arms wide. "Lana." Jaya greeted back with a smile while giving a one-arm hug to her friend. Our little friend found himself smothered between the chests of the two inhuman girls, but he didn't mind at all. The feeling of those strange large balls against him was nice, and they were comfy. He didn't know it, but many men would kill to be in his place. The two friends hugged for a moment before stepping away from one another, still smiling. "Welcome back." "A room?" Lana asked the Jinko with a bright smile. "Yes, please. Now Lana, I want you to present someone," Jaya said gently before readjusting her hold on Harry so he was now facing the snake girl. Lana blinked at those words, but when her yellow eyes landed on the tiny being in her arms, hearts instantly appeared in them as a little squeal escaped her mouth. "Aw, who is this cute little thing?" Lana gushed softly as she looked at Harry with nothing but pure adoration. Harry blushed at those words, not at all used at being praised, and glanced up at Jaya with an unsure look on his face. The Jinko kissed him on the nose before gesturing him to go ahead. Still hesitant but no wanting to disappoint her, the small child turned his head back toward the still smiling snake girl before opening his mouth to speak. "Hello, Miss Lana." He didn't know it, but he wasn't speaking normally anymore. The reactions he got was not what he expected. The Jinko looked at him with shock and surprise while the snake girl almost jumped back with an expression of absolute shock on her appealing face. "Little one. How do you know the noble tongue?" Lana asked him with wide eyes of shock. Harry frowned at her in confusion. "What do you mean, miss? Aren't we speaking normally?" "No, child, we are speaking the great tongue, the language of serpents," Lana responded a bit calmer as the shock slowly disappeared. Blinking, Harry glanced at Jaya and saw her looking at him strangely as if she wasn't understanding what he was saying. And it was the case, as all she could hear were hisses. "Where did you learn it, little one?" Lana asked him gently while curious. "I don't know, I never spoke to a snake before," Harry answered shyly with his index fingers touching one another. His shyness made him even cuter in Lana's eyes as she internally squealed at him. "And why that?" she asked him gently, but this time in the normal way. "Because I wasn't allowed to speak." Harry's answer was not what she expected. Blinking at those words, Lana shot a questioning glance toward Jaya, who mouthed her later. Nodding at her feline friend, the snake girl looked back at Harry when the latter asked her innocently. "Miss, sorry to be rude, but what are you?" Cooing at him for his curiosity, Lana gently picked him up, earning herself a surprised squeak from the little kid before gently pressing him against her chest. "Well, sweetheart, I'm a lamia," she cooed gently while caressing his face with a hand. Harry blushed madly at the attention and shot a shy look toward Jaya, whose only response was a warm smile. But then the Jinko looked at her friend with a straight face now as she demanded her. "Can I have him back now?" "I don't know, Jay, he is awfully cuddly," Lana retorted playfully while smirking at the tiger girl. "I am?" Harry asked her with a titled head. "Yes, you are as cuddly as a teddy," the Lamia responded with a coo as she kissed his face, earning herself a giggle from the small boy. Jaya rolled her eyes at her friend's antic before clearing her throat loudly, even if deep down she enjoyed hearing Harry's little laugh. "Lana, the room." The Lamia, who was nuzzling Harry's face, turned her head to look at her, blinking for a moment before a flash of remembrance passed through her eyes. "Oh right. Rosie." Lana called out for someone inside the building. A few seconds later, someone came out. It was a Momono like Jaya and Lana but different. The newcomer, Rosie, had white hair with splotches of black, tiny horns on top of her head along with flappy, cow-like, ears. Her lower body was covered with fur in similar colors to her hair and ears, and her peach were well wide, and wagging behind her large rump, was a cow-like tail. Harry then saw that, where her feet should have been, were hooves. In addition, she was wearing what looked like a waitress outfit. "You asked for me, dear," the cowgirl asked the Lamia with a smile after bowing at her. "Yes, can you go take this cute little thing in Jaya's room?" Lana inquired Rosie while looking down at Harry, who was still in her arms. "Of course," the cowgirl answered with a nod as she looked at the little one in her boss's arms. The emerald-eyed child didn't know why, but he wasn't afraid of the newcomer, especially when she shot him a warm smile when her eyes locked on him. The Jinko shot a questioning look toward the Lamia, who returned it with a look that said, "We need to talk." Nodding at her scaly friend, the Jinko then looked at the cowgirl. "Rosie? Can you also give him something to eat too?" "The little one is too thin for my taste," Jaya added with a tiny smile as she went to ruffle the top of Harry's hair. As if called, a deep growl echoed from the child's belly, and this caused him to blush deeply in embarrassment. However, his reaction also caused the three Momonos to giggle or coo in amusement. "I would be happy to," Rosie said to the Jinko before gently approaching her boss. Lana gave one last kiss to Harry before handing him over to the cowgirl. The small child looked at his current holder with some curiosity, and Rosie only smiled at him before looking back at her fellow monster girls. "I will leave you be now," the cowgirl said to the two before turning around to leave. However, Harry's head quickly turned around to look at Jaya with a pleading look, and the Jinko instantly understood that he didn't want to be separated from her. "I will come to you soon, Harry. Be nice to Miss Rosie, okay?" Jaya inquired gently as she waved at him. "Yes, Miss Jaya." Harry answered back softly, but it was loud enough to be heard by the Jinko and the Lamia. Jaya and Lana watched as Rosie took Harry inside the building, and once they disappeared out of sight, the Lamia turned her head to stare at her friend with a stern expression on her face. "Explain," it was not a request but more like an order. However, the Jinko ignored it and began her tale of how she met the little boy and what had apparently happened to him before finding him. At the same time, Rosie used her unused arm to open the door of one of the rooms, and Harry had to admit that the interior looked kind of inviting and the bed looked to be really comfortable. "Is this where Miss Jaya sleep?" he asked the cowgirl with a titled head. "Indeed, whenever she came to our village, she would use the exact same room over and over again," Rosie answered with a smile as she carefully putted the child on the bed. "Miss Rosie?" "Yes, little one?" she asked him gently. "What are you?" "I know Miss Jaya is a Jinko and Miss Lana is a Lamia," but Harry began to say before being interrupted by a finger pressed on his lips. Rosie had a warm smile on her face as she looked down at him. "I understand, child, you don't need to say more," she began to say while rubbing his cheek before adding. "To answer you, dear, I'm an Holstor." "Are there any other Memono like you?" he asked her curiously. "It's Momono, dear, but good trying again to answer you. Yes, there are many type of Momonos around here: harpies, ratatosk, dragons, chimeras, griffins, mermaids, and many more," Rosie told him with a smile, not at all annoyed to answer questions. Wow, Harry gasped with amazement as stars could be seen shining in his eyes. The whole store giggled in amusement as she had to admit that he was pretty cute right now. Harry opened his mouth to ask something but then his stomach growled again. Well, time to feed you, Rosie cooed at the adorable child as she petted his head. Then she slowly went out of the room before stopping at the entrance to look at the tiny child. Stay here. I will be back with your food in a minute. Rosie told him gently before leaving him alone in the room, closing the door behind her. Now alone, Harry sat patiently on the bed, thinking about what had happened so far. Everything seemed so unreal, him being gushed over, him getting hugs and kisses etc., but yet they were. A part of him thought that he was dreaming, that everything he experienced recently never happened. But the other part could tell that it was real. He was receiving attention like never before and no one seemed eager to beat the freakishness out of him. So far, the people he met were nice. A lot nicer than the people at Private Drive. Harry was still a bit overwhelmed by the amount of attention he received so far, but he was not complaining. For the first time in his life, he felt loved. He felt like he might belong somewhere in this world. Whatever this world was. Since he first laid eyes on Miss Jaya, Harry knew that somehow he was not on Earth anymore, but instead of being scared he felt grateful. He had nothing left on his home world as the people there only saw him as a freak and a disgusting waste of air. On Earth, he was beaten on a daily basis, but here none of them happened. Maybe he could actually be happy. His thoughts were broken by Rosie as the whole store opened the room's door. In her left hand was a plate of food. Room service. Rosie said out loud with an eye-closed smile. Harry couldn't help but be lured by the smell of food, and drool could be seen falling out of his mouth. The whole store giggled softly in amusement as she gave him his plate. Enjoy, sweetie, she cooed at him gently as she sat at his side. Meanwhile, outside the building, Jaya just finished her tale and wasn't surprised by the reaction she got from her scaly friend. In fact, Lana was pissed as her teeth were bared in anger and her eyes narrowed. But then it quickly turned into one of sorrow as she whispered in a sad tone. I can't believe that did such things to such a cute little darling. I know, but at least he won't suffer anymore now, Jaya retorted with a nod of agreement. Lana nodded her head in agreement, but then her face turned serious as she added. Jaya, you need to take him to a healer soon. I'm sure you felt it as well, this little one is far too thin. I could count his ribs. I know I will have to make sure he is properly fed and maybe change his clothes, they look far too big for him, the Jinko whispered to herself with a sigh. Indeed, and you will also need to do something with that scar of his. I don't know why, but I felt something malevolent from it, Lana replied with a frown of confusion. Jaya nodded in understanding as herself was suspicious of the strange scar on the little one's forehead. It was too well shaped to be done by a knife or a blade, maybe it was magical. After a second of thought, an idea popped into the Jinko's mind. Maybe Esther can help with that? Jaya demanded to her scaly friend, who blinked in surprise at the question. Lana then thought about it before nodding her head. Yes, she might help, but she won't do it for free, you know. The Jinko sighed deeply at this, but her face didn't falter as she responded firmly, I don't care Lana, Harry's needs are more important to me. Hearing this, the Lamia couldn't help but smiling at her strppd friend. You know, you do sound like a mom, Lana cooed with a tiny smirk as she crossed her arms over her bust. Jaya shot her a glare at first but quickly shrugged as she responded calmly, I suppose I found the child, so he is my responsibility. It had nothing to do with the fact he is a cute little darling, the Lamia asked her teasingly. What if it was? Are you jealous? Jaya asked back with a cat-like grin. Yes. I wish it was me who found him. Lana cried out with a pout on her face before the two of them shared a little laugh. For a moment, the two friends laughed happily and the people passed by. Either ignored them or glanced at them in interest. Thankfully, they were all ignored. You know, there's another thing that is bothering me, the Lamia said once she caught her breath. How can a human speak the great tongue? Lana asked with a frown of confusion. I don't know, I never heard about such a thing either, Jaya admitted with a sigh. A long silence followed as the two of them stared at the building, thinking. You know what? Let's think about this later. Right now I want nothing more than to enjoy a good rest, Jaya said after gazing up at the darkening sky. Oh. Of course. I still have some work to do anyway, and beside I still have to call Esther, but don't hesitate to call me whenever you need. Lana responded kindly to her STRPPD friend, who smiled back at her with appreciation as the two of them entered the building. I will tell Sherry to make your dinner, and please tell Rosie to come back, the Lamia then added to her retreating friend with a smile. Thank you Lon, and I will. Jaya said to her with gratefulness before heading toward her room, which was at the 3rd floor. Opening the door, the Jinko had to pause as she saw something cute. Harry was sleeping in the large bed, suckling on his thumb, and Rosie was sitting near him. The whole store had a warm smile on her face as she gently rubbed his hair with a hand. However, once she noticed that someone was present, she gently went back on her hooves before approaching the newcomer. He fell asleep a little while ago. The poor dear was clearly exhausted, Rosie whispered to the Jinko in a saddened tone as she eyed the sleeping form of Harry. Jaya nodded her head with an equally sad look on her face. Considering what the poor child told her, it wasn't surprising, but still it was heartbreaking. Lana wants you to come back to work, the Jinko whispered to the Holstor, who nodded in understanding as she picked up the plate of food she gave Harry earlier, before leaving the room after one last look at the sleeping boy. Once Rosie left, Jaya closed the door before slowly approaching Harry. She sat on the bed while making sure to not disturb his beauty sleep before looking at him. He looked so peaceful, so relaxed, but she knew that inside, he was just a tormented little thing. Lowering her head near his ears, Jaya then whispered gently, "Don't worry Harry, I will always be there for you." A smile appeared on Harry's sleeping face, and the Jinko couldn't help but smiling back even if he couldn't see her due to him being well asleep. Then gently, she used one of her large paws to caress his hair, and in response of her gesture, the small boy released a little coo, which caused Jaya to release a little ah at how adorable he was right now. The Jinko once again promised to take care of this child as best as she could, even if it might kill her. A few minutes later, she had to open the door as her meal arrived, and after eating it and thanking the one bringing it to her, the Jinko climbed on the bed before making herself comfortable while gently enveloping Harry into a gentle embrace, with him sleeping against her toned stomach. Barely a few minutes later, she joined Harry in the arms of Morpheus. The bird started chirping. The sun rose over the village, breaking into the room of the large inn hotel where a certain duo were sleeping peacefully. Harry Potter, who was used to waking up early all thanks to his loving relatives, began to stir as he found himself in someone's arms. Panicking and have forgotten where he was, the thin black-haired child instinctively began to struggle and shake. However, his struggles didn't last long, as barely a second later, the one holding him started to rub his back before he felt a pair of lips kissing the top of his head. "Hello there, sleepyhead," a feminine voice greeted in a gentle and warm tone. Blinking, the little boy turned his head to look at where the voice came from, only to stare into a pair of fiery orange eyes staring back at him with kindness. After a second of stunned silence, Harry's eyes widened when he remembered where he was and who was holding him. His sufferings at the Dursleys' hands was over. No more will he be treated as a SLV, no more will he have to cook for his obese cousin and his fat uncle, no more beatings. "Harry?" Jaya called out in concern and alarm when she saw the tears slowly forming in his eyes. Normally she wouldn't wake up so early in the morning, but thanks to the feeling of something shivering against her. Quickly, she sat up on the bed while picking him up before engulfing the little one into a gentle embrace. Without hesitation, Harry buried his face into her chest and began to cry softly. Concerned by his sudden behavior, the Jinko rubbed his back with her paws, whispering calming into his ear. "Sweetie. What's wrong?" she asked him with nothing but concern in her voice. I am just happy, Miss Jaya," Harry answered in a tiny voice as his face was still buried in her chest. The Jinko relaxed a bit hearing this, but then smiled down at him gently. "I'm glad you are, dear. Now tell me, did you slept well?" "I did, Miss Jaya. I had no bad dreams," Harry answered with a bright smile on his face. Jaya giggled in amusement at his answer before smiling down at him tenderly. Again, I'm glad to hear that, honey. Now how about we give you a bath then go and get breakfast? The Jinko inquired him with gently. Miss Jaya. What is a bath? Harry asked her with a titled head and eyes filled with curiosity. Hearing this, Jaya had to restrain herself from growling in anger. Of course those animals wouldn't do something as simple as giving this little one a bath. She managed to hide her anger behind a smile as she looked down at his curious face. A bath, sweetie, is an act of washing your body when sitting in water. It makes you all clean up and better looking, she answered him gently as she climbed out of the bed with him still in her arms. Harry nodded his little head in understanding and let himself be carried by Miss Jaya as she led him toward what looked like a bathroom. After putting him down, the Jinko, while filling the large tub with water, gently told him to take off his clothes. With her back turned, she didn't notice her charge flinching in fear as his eyes looked at the water. She didn't know it, but little Harry had a really bad history with water after all. His uncle Vernon had tried to drown him more than once at Private Drive, and the fact that he almost died in the sea after his beloved uncle threw him off the ship didn't help his case. He stiffened when he felt himself being picked up but relaxed once it realized it was just Miss Jaya. However, his fear returned as she slowly set him down toward the tub of water. The Jinko, for her part, was far from pleased when she saw the amount of scars he was carrying on his scrawny body, and needless to say that she wanted nothing more than to hunt down his relatives to give them a piece of her mind. Shaking her head to get rid of those thoughts, she was about to start her work, when she noticed something. Harry was shaking a lot as his face showed nothing but fear. Harry? Are you all right, little one? Jaya asked him with concern. Water is scary, Harry answered in a soft tone, shivering a lot more. Frowning, Jaya gently started to pet his head with one of her paws, ruffling his hair in a comforting manner. Why would you say that? The Jinko asked him gently as curiosity filled her body along with a sense of dread. Harry whimpered softly but gathered his courage to answer, albeit in a scared tone, It's always so hot, I don't like going under, can't breathe. Hearing this, Jaya's face was one of horror as she looked down at her charge with wide eyes. What did they do to him, she wondered to herself with anger and concern. Thankfully, once again, she managed to not show her true feeling as the Jinko looked down at him with a warm smile. Harry, you know I will never hurt you, right? A nod was her answer. Then close your eyes and let Miss Jaya taking care of you, Jaya cooed at him motherly before starting her work. She started by washing his hair and smiled a bit when she saw that Harry's eyes were closed even if he still was shivering a bit. However, it was not as intense as earlier, so he clearly trusted her. The thought made her smile as she carefully rinsed his head. With the head done, she attacked the rest of his body and she grimaced as she studied the scars. Some were old but many more were red as if they had been made recently. The thought of someone hurting such a cute child both irked and pained her. Not only that, but the sight of his clearly visible ribs also pained her deeply. No children should suffer like this. A few minutes later, Harry was now perfectly clean. However, Jaya now had to face another problem. That won't do at all, the tigerish Momono grumbled in disgust as she stared at the rags the little one was wearing the day before. What is it, Miss Jaya? Harry asked her innocently while being completely wrapped in his towel. You need new clothes, little one, the Jinko responded to him gently as she picked him up. Is there a problem with the one I have? The poor child asked her with confusion as he pointed at the clothes the Dursleys gave him. They are nothing more than rags. Those things can't be called clothes anymore, Jaya answered with slight disgust aimed at the clothes in question. But those are all I have, Harry replied with some sadness. That's why we are going to go show dash, the Jinko began to say when someone knocked at the door. Jaya? It's me, Lana. Your best friend, a familiar voice echoed from the other side. The Jinko rolled her eyes in amusement before going to open the door, but not before putting Harry on the bed. Opening the door, Jaya was greeted by not only the smiling face of a certain Lamia who had a large bag in one hand, but also the equally smiling face of one of Rosie the Holster who had a large food trays in her hands. Good morning, Jay. Lana greeted her friend with a hug which the Jinko returned with a playful roll of her eyes. Good morning to you too, Lon, you too, Rosie. Good morning, the whole store answered politely to the Jinko before handing her the trays. Your breakfast. Thank you, Rosie. Jaya thanked the cowgirl with a smile as she picked up the food. Just doing my job as a waitress, the whole store began to say to the Jinko before her eyes fell on something else, or rather someone else, as she waved at a certain child who shyly waved back. With a smile, Rosie then left to resume her work, leaving behind her boss and the other two. Lana smiled at the retreating form of her employee before looking back at the Jinko with a smile. I called Esther and she is going to come as soon as possible, she told her STRPPD friend in a serious tone. Good. What's in the bag? Jaya asked her while pointing at say bag in the Lamia's hand. Just some clothes for the little cutie over there, Lana answered with a coo as she looked at Harry with hearts in her eyes. Harry blushed at the praise and hid his face behind his hands, earning himself giggles from the two Momonos. The young child was not at all used to receive praises or even compliments, but it felt good. For years he had believed everything his relatives had told him, and seeing how everyone in the neighborhood treated him, he grew to accept that he was nothing but a pathetic and unlovable little freak. But here so far, he received nothing but compliments and it felt reinvigorating. His thoughts were broken when he felt himself being hugged by someone and, after turning his head to see who it was, he saw it was none other than Lana the Lamia. At his side was the large bag of clothes she held earlier. After a second of uneasiness, the young boy slowly but surely relaxed against her touch as his head laid against the crook of her neck. Hello dearie, the Lamia cooed at him gently as she looked down at him with nothing but pure affection. Hi Miss Lana, Harry greeted back shyly. Still the sweet and polite gentleman of the day before, I see, Lana cooed teasingly before giggling when she saw the little boy hiding his face behind his hands in embarrassment and shyness. Come on sweetie, try your new clothes, the Lamia gently urged him with some trepidation while Jaya rolled her eyes in fond annoyance at her friend's antics. But she would be lying to herself if she said that she wasn't curious as well. She wondered what type of clothes the Lamia got for the little one. Are they really for me? Harry asked her with surprise and shock clear on his face. Hearing this, the Jinko sighed deeply while using a paw to pinch the bridge of her nose while Lana looked pained for a moment. Her STRPPD friend had told her the day before about this little one's terrible past, and it broke her heart to think of such a cutie being treated like this. But her pained look quickly disappeared into a warm smile as she answered gently, Of course dear, now try them on. And he did. A minute later, Harry looked at the two Momonos while fresh new clothes, a nice white shirt, blue pants, cute white socks and even shoes. It was nothing special, but for the child, it was. Looking at Lana with shining eyes, he did something that took both monster girls aback. He hugged the Lamia, but due to his size, he only managed to hug her large tail. Thank you Miss Lana, he cried out with a happy face while hugging her as tightly as he could, which wasn't really strong for the Lamia. However, once those words reached her pointy ears, Lana literally squealed in delight before snatching the little one into a hug, nuzzling his cheek. Oh, you are so adorable, the Lamia cooed out as she kissed his face repeatedly. Jaya smiled warmly at the scene as Harry's little laugh echoed in the room, but then they all froze when they heard a strange sound. A growl coming from both Harry and Jaya's stomachs. The two instantly blushed in embarrassment, and the sight caused Lana to laugh loudly with humor. Well, maybe you should start eating your breakfast or else these two will growl for a while, Lana teasingly told the two with a smirk. The Jinko shot her friend a glare, but her red cheeks clearly showed her embarrassment while Harry hid himself into the Lamia's bust with a face as red as a tomato. The sight of them being so embarrassed caused Lana to laugh loudly with amusement, much to the chagrin of the two. Time skip. Don't be afraid honey, Miss Esther will not hurt you, Jaya cooed to her charge as she, Lana and the boy in question were standing in another part of the building. 3 hours passed since they took their breakfast and now they were waiting for this Miss Esther. Harry was nervous about meeting new people despite what his caretaker said about her being really kind. Of course, they didn't just stood there doing nothing. Jaya helped Lana in her work and Harry got to spend time with Rosie, the nice whole store. He also got to meet another of Miss Lana's workers, an elf named Silena. She was Nice but always looked firm and stern in appearance. But, in Harry's opinion, she does give great hugs. Lana and Jaya came to pick him up a few minutes ago and now they were waiting for their guest to arrive. The Jinko had explained to her charge that he was about to meet someone who will help him with the scar on his forehead and maybe with other physical problem. Harry was happy for that as he hated it dearly. After all, it was a reminder of his parents' death. Back to present, Harry didn't respond to the Jinko but did shot her a nervous glance before burying his face into her melons. At the right side of Jaya, Lana couldn't retain herself for cooing at the little one. As for her, his shyness made him look even cuter. Jaya smirked at her scaly friend before kissing Harry on his head, earning a soft squeak from him. However, before anything else could happen, someone magically appeared a few meters away from them. Harry pulled his face away from Jaya's melons to stare at the newcomer with both curiosity and nervousness. The newcomer was a voluptuous but appealing young woman who looked to be around the same age that Jaya and Lana, with long pink hair cascading down her back with a few strands sticking out to hang in front of her red eyes. Her dark blue sundress did little more like nothing to conceal her large melonsy cup, stopping at her knees. In addition, she had also had on black shoes that were without a single doubt designer made. Much to Harry's surprise, the newcomer looked no different from a human woman except that she had curved black horns sprouting from her head, bat-like wings folded on her back and a long thin black tail whose tip had a heart-like shape. On her belly, Harry could see a strange tattoo which looked like a runic heart. "Hello girls. Long time no see," the newcomer greeted Lana and Jaya with a bright smile on her face. "Hello Esther," the Lamia greeted her back before the two of them shared a big hug. "It's been a long time and you are still a total dork," Jaya retorted teasingly while caused Esther to shot her a brief glare until her red eyes landed on something in the Jinko's arms. "Aw, is he the cutie Lana was talking about?" the newcomer cooed as she gushed over Harry, who blushed madly at those words. "Indeed Esther, meet Harry, Harry meet Esther, she is a succubus," Jaya said gently while looking at her charge at the last part. "Hi Miss Esther," Harry greeted the succubus with shyness. "Aw, hi to you too cutie." Esther cooed back while giving him a little kiss on the head, earning herself an embarrassed squeak and a deep blush. All three Momonos giggled in amusement at his reaction, but then Esther looked at the Jinko and Lamia. "And where did you find such a charming little one?" "I found him yesterday during a walk, he was alone in the forest," Jaya answered with a soft tone as she caressed her charge's back with a paw, being sure to not scratch him by accident with her claws. Blinking, Esther shot a blank look toward Lana, who nodded her head with a straight face. Then the succubus turned her head back to the Jinko before approaching her. Harry couldn't retain himself from whimpering in slight fear at the approaching woman, but then, remembering that Jaya said she was nice, he calmed down as he looked at her in the eyes instead. Esther smiled down at him once she stopped in front of her friend before lowering her face down. "Such a brave little one, I can sense your fear and yet you stand firm, impressive especially for a young wizard such as yourself," the succubus cooed with a smile as she petted his right cheek with a hand, earning herself a blush and an embarrassed look for the little one. However, a look of surprise soon grew on his face at the last part as he looked up at her with wide eyes. "What?" he asked her with a stunned look on his face. Lana and Jaya, for their parts, looked equally just as stunned by the news and looked at one another with wide eyes. "A wizard? Are you sure?" the Lamia asked the succubus with disbelief clear in her tone. "Yes, and one with far greater magical potential than I have ever encountered before. This deserves a closer look," Esther said gently as her red eyes were still locked on Harry's face. The little one, at those words, looked nervous and unsure, which she noticed. "Fear not, sweetie, I would never harm a child. Especially one as cute as yourself. I merely wish to know more you, and maybe help you know yourself. I swear on my life that the process is painless, so will you allow me to see your memory?" Esther asked him in a gentle and warm tone while using a hand to caress his face. Harry looked hesitant to allow her such a thing, but her voice was so warm, so welcoming. He felt comfort just by hearing it. Shooting a glance toward Jaya and Lana, and after seeing them giving him encouraging smiles, the dark-haired 6-year-old child looked back at the succubus before nodding his head in acceptance. Smiling warmly at him, Esther smiled in appreciation before looking at him in the eyes, her face an inch or two away from his as she said calmly, "Look at me in the eyes and let me do all the work, dear." Her red eyes brightened a bit and then she saw everything. She saw the happy moments he had during the very first year of his life with his parents, a wizard of an ancient and noble house and a prodigal which born of non-magical people, both of them were powerful in their own right. She saw his parents talking to an old man about a prophecy concerning their child. Esther retained herself from laughing at the old man's horrible choice of clothes. She then saw the night when the Dark Lord came for the Potters. Esther was saddened to see the death of Harry's mother and admired how brave she was in her last moment as she gave her life to protect her child. Then she saw a man one she recognized as his godfather, handing him to a giant of a man with big beard who was apparently named Hagrid before running away to avenge his friends. Esther watched as the giant man took baby Harry to the old man she saw earlier along with a stern-looking woman in green robes. She watched as the old man argued with the woman about Harry's placement with the people of the house, with her stating that they were the worst kind of muggles, whatever that mean. In the end, the woman lost and she watched as Dumbledore, the old man's name, gently putted the boy on a doorstep with nothing but a letter on his crib. But then, once Hagrid and Minerva the woman left, Esther frowned when she heard Dumbledore's next words, which filled her with anger. "Everything is going into motion. You, Harry Potter, will make me become the next Merlin thanks to the wards I will place around this house. The Dursleys will hate you even more. You will become the malleable boy I need to fulfill the prophecy, the perfect weapon. And once you will sacrifice yourself to Tom, I will end him once and for all, and I will make sure the name of Potter will disappear from wizard history. With your family knowledge will be mine just like its fortune." Once he stopped talking, Dumbledore laughed darkly to himself before waving his wand in the air, while muttering something. Esther's eyes were still locked on him with anger and hatred even when he left. Then, much to her growing shock and anger, the succubus saw the years following his placement at the Dursleys, years of neglect and abuse. Esther saw all they did to him, even the people of the neighborhood. The succubus wanted to go there and kill every last one of those people but couldn't, as instead, she painfully resumed her observation. Thankfully, there were one memory left, but it was no less sad. Esther watched the event happening on the large ship Harry and his despicable family were on, to the way his fat cousin pushed into a waiter to his uncle, tossing him off a ship. Having seen enough, Esther quickly broke the connection with a gasp before looking over at Harry. The little one blinked a few times before squeaking in surprise when he found himself being picked up by the succubus, who instantly hugging him gently. Tears could be seen falling from her eyes. "You poor little thing," she cried out gently but yet tearfully as she hugged him tightly. Lana and Jaya were taken aback by the succubus's behavior and looked at one another with consternation. Harry, for his part, tried his best to comfort the crying woman, but a part of him felt nothing but guilt. Maybe if he didn't allow her to see his life, she wouldn't be crying right now. "Esther, what did you see?" Jaya asked her with concern and apprehension as she stepped closer along with Lana. The succubus turned her head to look at the two with tearful eyes as she answered softly but yet in a tone filled with anger, "I will tell you later, but what I saw is disgusting me." "Little one, look at me please," Esther demanded to the boy in a gentle tone while waving a hand around them. And he did just that. "Hold still for me, and sorry for the pain," Esther began to say before putting a hand on the lightning bolt scar on his forehead. Harry, who was about to ask her what she meant, suddenly felt something tug inside his head and retained himself from screaming as he felt nothing but pain. It hurt so much that barely a moment later, a scream of agony escaped his throat. Jaya and Lana were about to order the succubus to stop whatever she was doing, only to stop at what they saw. From Harry's scar, came out what looked like a strange dark mist, but it wasn't what shocked them. It was the sight of a screaming snake-like face forming in the mist. "There you are," Esther grumbled in hatred as she stared at the face, her red eyes glowing even more with power. The succubus, with her power, pulled the mist away from Harry's face before turning it into a misty ball the size of a golf ball. Just as the mist turned into a ball, Harry and the snake-like face stopped screaming and the scar of the boy's forehead was bleeding a bit. The poor child cried softly at the pain he endured and was instantly picked up by Jaya, who started to comfort him. Lana was doing the same by caressing his back with a hand. Esther looked at the child with a sad expression but then turned her gaze toward the ball resting in the palm of her hand with nothing but disgust. Without hesitation, she clenched her hand and the scream of agony from earlier reappeared briefly before ending as quickly as it came. The moment the misty thing was destroyed, Harry felt a strong headache. Why? Because of the flux of informations that entered his mind to the point that it hurt him. Jaya, seeing his pain, kissed him on the forehead while using a hand to rub his back in comfort, whispering into his ears. Esther. What was that? Lana asked the succubus with narrowed eyes. Jaya did the same while comforting the crying boy in her arms. The succubus slowly turned her gaze toward them before sighing deeply. Well, where should I start? So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 2. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author Asian Lion Heart 310 on fanfiction.net. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.